Hi everybody, Charles here. In today's video, we're going to talk about Grandma's supply chain and food shortages. Everybody hang in there and we'll be right back. Thanks for coming by our channel. If you like our channel and our videos, subscribe to our channel. Like this video, click that bell icon when you subscribe and you'll be notified of our new videos as we upload them. And share our video with your friends on social media. So thank you all and God bless. Welcome to Backroads Living. I'm Charles. I'm your host today. And we're going to be talking about Grandma's supply chain and food shortages. So the first question is that we have to ask ourselves is what causes food shortages? Well, there's several things that can cause food shortage. One of them is labor shortages. And we've seen that in the United States of America this year. And we're going to continue to see it throughout the fall. We've already had reports come in that with this second wave of this stuff, that there'll be more and more laborers that will be quarantined and put out of work. And that will cause the crops that are coming in and ripe to pick to sit on the vine and rot or either be plowed under. Sometimes it's not so much of a shortage of the actual product itself. It's a problem with getting that product to the market. And if you have a labor shortage and you can't get your product to the market and you grow commercially, then you're going to have to suffer the consequences. And that's what's been happening with a lot of supply chains, not only across America, but across many other countries in this world. Just a lot of things going on that we need to keep our eyes on, folks. The next thing that causes or can cause a food shortage in like a confined area would be civil unrest. You take these large cities that here this year that's had a lot of civil unrest, and they've had businesses burnt to the ground right on main streets and stuff like that. Well, these truckers won't go into those cities and bring in a lot of this stuff. They drive around them. They stay away from them. And if you can't get the product in because of civil unrest, then there's going to be a food shortage for that particular area. And we'll see more and more of that, I think, as this thing unfolds after the election. So keep that in mind about civil unrest. Droughts can cause it. We've seen droughts this year. We've seen locusts this year. Worldwide, there's been countries that have suffered drought. Vietnam suffered drought. They didn't get near as much rice as they normally do, and they were locking down their exports. They no longer do exports on rice. Floods. We've seen China this year. They've been flooded and flooded and flooded and flooded. Just here recently, the last flood busted that dam, and 11 million acres of rice that was ready to harvest was completely destroyed. So floods can create food shortages also. And now China is trying to import all the food they can from every country in the world. And most countries, just like the United States, is sending them food that we need to be keeping here in the States, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. The next thing is storms. We saw 10 to 11 million acres of corn devastated in Iowa this year, just flattened by that huge windstorm that came through there. Straight line winds just blew it right down, broke most of it off at the top of the stalk. Just devastated the corn crop in that area. And that's one of the largest producers of corn in the United States, is that area that was hit the hardest. So the question is, we have all these things that are going on. How do we survive a food shortage? If these things continue to happen, how do we get by? Well, let's ask ourselves another question. How did Grandma get by? How did Grandpa get by? My grandmother came through the Great Depression, as well as my dad. My dad was born in 1920. He was 10-year-old when his father was killed in the deep mines in Black Mountain above Hardin County, Kentucky. They packed up their bags, with what little insurance money my grandmother got, and they moved to Knox County, Kentucky, and bought a small farm. She didn't have anybody to take care of her. She used what she knew to get by. She had her own supply chain. She grew two huge gardens behind her house, her and her boys. And they raised a milk cow, and they built a chicken house, and they raised chickens for eggs and meat. They raised lots and lots of corn. And I've heard my dad tell many times of when the corn would come in, his mother, my grandmother, and him would load up bushel baskets of corn and sacks full of corn, and they would catch a buckboard wagon going to town about 5 miles from where they lived. A neighbor would come through and pick them up and give them a ride to town, and they would take that corn into town, and they would have it milled into meal, ground into meal, and they would half that with the store that ground it for them. She'd take half the meal, and he'd keep the other half for grinding it. She knew how to get things done. They worked hard. They put up food. They preserved food. When droughts came, they went to the creek and gathered water. They had already gathered water in buckets and anything they could get from runoff water. My mother had a huge, I remember a big vat of some kind. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was large. Actually, there was 2 of them. And she had them in the corners of her porch. And every time it rained, that thing, or those things caught water. Probably 50, 75 gallon, might have been 100 gallon. I can't remember. I was very small. But I remember that. And I'd ask different of times why she had those big old buckets or big vats like that, big barrels, I guess is what they were, catching all that rainwater. Because she was always having to scoop the top of it off. And she was always saying, honey, you never know when you're going to have an emergency. Well, let me tell you, you never know when you're going to have an emergency. And you need to learn to do things for yourself. Now, that's just the bottom line. We've raised a generation of people that don't know how to do nothing. They don't know how to do anything. They can't cook for themselves. They can't fend for themselves. They have to be sent to school. They have to be, if it comes to surviving on their own, they have to be told everything, or everything has to be done for them, or they have to depend on the government. There's going to be a lot of chaos when this stuff comes down. There's going to be a lot of hurt. There's going to be a lot of people suffering. So let me encourage you to learn how to do stuff. Get you some books and read those books. Even if you haven't put your hand to the plow to learn it, at least you'll have some knowledge of it. There's all kinds of how-to books out there on how to garden. That's the first thing you need to do if you've got a place you can do it, is learn to garden. Learn to garden and feed yourself. So, labor shortages. My grandmother didn't have a labor shortage. She knew how to do it herself, and her sons did it, and that's how they survived. Civil unrest, it was unheard of in that day. If there had been civil unrest, it would have been afraid to come in the area that my grandmother lived in that community. Those people would have band together, and they would have stomped out the civil unrest in a heartbeat. It would have ended pronto. The next thing was droughts. Now, there was droughts and people suffered things. There was not always enough water to go around in the summer, for your crops or whatever, but they did the best they could. And if somebody fell short, the neighbors pitched in and helped out. But they always had, I can never recall a time in my life when I went in my grandmother's cellar that the shelves were not packed with canned goods. She kept them packed with canned goods of all kinds. Always just packed full. My grandparents, as well as my mom and dad, had wells. And those wells were drilled deep. They never, ever in my lifetime had run dry. We had a spring behind our house on a coal bank. Many of you don't know what that is, but my dad went back there and dug out a spring and a coal bank and took block and brick in there and built him a container back there to catch that water. That water stood in there year round. It didn't matter how hot it got. There was fresh water to drink at our house all the time. So, you know, floods and storms come. They weathered that along with all their friends and neighbors. In the world we live in now, everyone can't grow a garden, and I understand that. But you still have to be responsible for yourself. So you need to get out and get you some food. You need to get canned meats for protein. You need to get rice and beans for protein and carbohydrates. You need to have some fruits to eat. You need to buy you some stuff and get it put back. And people say, well, we don't have any space to store this stuff. Our closets are full and all this stuff. Well, you need to get rid of some of that stuff in your closets. Let me just speak pretty blunt to you. You need to get rid of some of that stuff. If my closet was so full I couldn't put food back in it, I would take it and throw it out in a dump before I would go hungry. Put food under your bed. You need to be prepared for what could happen. Now, I don't know that it is going to happen, but I have a feeling that there is going to be a lot of civil unrest after this election, no matter who wins. I would suggest you be prepared to at least live a month, 2 weeks to a month in your home if you live in populated, dense areas. I don't see that happening here where I live. I'm still prepping back because food supply chains can still be broken. And we still may see more food shortages in our area coming to the grocery stores. I don't foresee the civil unrest because I don't think the people in this area would put up with it. But they will in the big cities. The government there will allow it to happen, so you need to watch for it. You need to be prepared for it. There's nothing you can do other than just be your own food supply chain. Get the stuff put back so it's there. You have to learn how to do stuff. You have to learn how to survive during those times. You need to learn how to vacuum seal if you've got time to do it. Vacuum seal dry goods. You need to learn how to water bath. Next year you probably don't have time this year. Next year, if you live through to next year, you need to learn how to do water bath canning. You need to learn how to use a pressure canner and how to dehydrate foods, dry out foods to use. To store this stuff back, to have food for the future, to have things for your future. We've come to a place in America that everybody just looks out for today and they never look ahead because they've always been taught that if a crisis comes, your government's going to take care of you. It's not going to happen this time, folks. You better be taking care of yourself. Better be ready to take care of yourself. This is just a generation that just don't foresee things and don't understand how things can happen overnight and how destruction and devastation can happen. Our grandparents didn't have the opinion that if things go sour, we'll depend on the government to take care of us. Our grandparents had the opinion that we're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to raise our own food, and we're not going to depend on anybody to take care of us. And that's what they did. We need to have a right mindset, physically and spiritually. To have a right mindset physically, you need to understand what's going on around you. And in order to do that, you've got to stop listening to the mainstream news media only. You need to get online and you need to research these articles. You need to find out what's going on in other countries. You need to see what's going on around your own country. And you're not going to find all that on the mainstream news because they report what their bosses tell them to report. The people that own them. They have an agenda to serve, all of them, not just one or two, all of them, all the way across the board. They have an agenda to meet and to serve, and they serve that purpose. That's what they do. Well, you have to take care of yourself. You have to find out for yourself because these people are not going to tell you. They're not in this to help you. They're in this to help themselves and to help their employers. So, the next thing I'd ask you to do is be spiritually prepared. Now, we talk about being mentally prepared and know that you can take care of yourself. To be mentally prepared and to have food put back and to know how to take care of yourself is a great accomplishment in itself. That's wonderful because it gives you some peace of mind and some comfort, knowing that if something happens that you can weather the storm. Well, when you're spiritually prepared, it's an even greater asset than being physically prepared. Because when you're physically prepared, then your peace is in God. Your peace comes from God. And yes, you can be physically and spiritually prepared. For God will give you a peace that surpasses all understanding. When your hope is in Christ and you have learned to rest in Him, then you don't have the fear of all this stuff, because you've come to understand that the grace of God will be sufficient for you no matter what you're going through. Even in death, God's grace is sufficient for you. So with that being said, let me encourage you, if you're watching this video today and you haven't been preparing for what's coming, or you haven't finished up your preparations, please go out and do it now while you can. Do these things. Buy this stuff while it's on the shelf. It's going to be gone shortly, and you won't be able to get it. So God bless you, and we'll see you in the next video.